Good God, it's talking. That never happened before. Okay, so hello everybody and welcome to the Kerry Writers Museum Rambling House, and we have a wonderful person for you to hear tonight, and it's Ruth Kirkpatrick. And Ruth has flown all the way through cyberspace to be with us this evening, and we're absolutely delighted to have her here. So hello Ruth.
Hello, lovely to be here.
Oh, lovely to have you here. And Ruth, just to let you know, we give the featured artist about 30 minutes to do their little bit, and then you are going to be entertained by all of the Irish people, and we have a Welsh person as well, and we might have a few surprises in there. So you'll entertain us first and give us the heat of your heart, and then we will bring the heat back to you in the second half, and we'll bring it on at the very end, maybe to give us a very short little story or tell us how you felt about the evening, So delighted to have you here. Céad Míle Fáilte, the 100,000 welcomes. And now I'm going to take myself out and I'm going to let you do your wonderful piece. And I can't wait to hear you again. Mwah.
Thanks, Maria. Well, it's lovely to be here tonight amongst all the Irish contingent, and I think we've got people from the north of Ireland, and we've also got people on from Scotland, I think, too. So I come from the northeast of Scotland originally, and I was thinking about May time, and so May is going to be a kind of a theme running through the material that I cover tonight. But I was thinking that this time of year is Whitsuntide, and around this time in the northeast, it would have been a time when there were Fian fairs, and that meant that men and women would go along to these fairs and stand in the street and be eyed up and down by the farmers and then chosen if they looked fit and healthy and strong to go and do work, different types of work on the big farms that there were at that in the sort of 1800s and early 1900s in particularly Aberdeenshire and Angus. So it made me think about a particular song that comes from that tradition. And, you know, the northeast of Scotland is one of the most rich areas of song that there is, because of the kind of culture that existed that time, where young men would live in bothies together and they would get basically their accommodation and their basic food, and they would work, and they might be hired at Whitsuntide right through to Martinmas, which was the 11th of November. And that would be a kind of natural half year for being employed. And they might not have been paid their fee or their wages until the end of the time they were feed for. So that got me thinking about my great grandmother, who was called Jessie Ducat. And she grew up on a farm called Black Hills, just outside Peterhead, up in the Buchan area of the northeast. And I was told by my mother that she grew up on a farm, like I say, and she took a fancy to one of the farm servants. His name was James. And so they started courting, and Jessie's father did not approve. So, and it wasn't because of snobbery, because there was a lot of snobbery about farm servants not being good enough for the farmer's daughter. But he said that one time he was in the pub and he heard James boasting that he was going to be all right from now on because he was wheeling with the farmer's daughter. So my great grandfather didn't like the way he was talking about her. And so he disapproved of their match. But nonetheless, they did get married, James and Jessie, and they moved into Peterhead. And James turned out to be quite into the drink. But my mother said that Jessie would never hear a word against him. And every week, her father would send down Fae Black Hills, the farm, a bag of tatties and a bag of oatmeal, just to make sure Jessie and their 13 children had enough to get by in case James had drunk his wages. So there are some common elements in that story of my great grandmother with a story called, a song called Bogie's Bonnie Bell. And some of the Scottish contingent might know it because it's a very well-known song. And in fact, James Reid, who was a great bothy ballad singer, said he knew 19 versions of this song. And it's about a young woman called Isabel Morrison, but there used to be a trend, and there still is a bit, that farmers would get called the name of their farm for their last name. I don't know if that happens in Ireland. But so Isabel Morrison, she was born in 1823, and she fell in love with one of the farm hands, and this is her story. Whitsuntide in Huntly Toon, 'twas there I did agree, we all bogie side the farmer, a 6-month 40 fee. New bogie was a surly carl, and this I knew full well, but he had a lovely daughter, and her name was Isabel. New Bell, she was the bonniest lass in all the countryside, and very soon I lost my heart to the bell o' Bogie's side. And oft times on a summer's night, I'd wondered wi' my dear, to watch the trooties louping by Bogie's water clear. New Bell was just nae match for me, and this I knew full well. Whene'er she turned her eye on me, she fairly cast her spell. I tried in vain to bide awa, when it came to eventide. Oh, but in a dream I'd wander to Bogie's water side. 'Twas just afore the term time, old Bogie sent for me, and said wi' faces dark as night, it's you I want to see. Gin what my doctor says it's true, we can nae mair agree, and it's doon the road you'll gang without a penny o' your fee. I says, old man, you're fairly right, I hung my head in shame, but I would marry Bell the morn and gie to her my name. He roared and yelled, and in his rage he said that rather he would see his daughter lie indeed than married unto me. Though I was just a ploomin' chiel, I thought he was gey sair. Though hard it was to part wi' Bell, I didna say nae mair, but packed my kist and left the farm. Dear Bell I didna see. I was that mad I never sought the wages due to me. Well, Beryl Bell, she married a tinkler chap, they called him Suitor John. She parks his pans and ladles around my foggy lawn. They say that Bogie rued the day that he did rant and yell. Oh, but I mind the summer nights I had wi' bonny Bell. So,
Audience, way!
so the tinkler chap that Isabel Morrison married, I mean, some folk would say that, you know, her father didn't let her marry a farmhand, and then she went off and married a traveller, which at that time might have been seen as, you know, even less desirable to her father. But I've heard that Bell's husband went on to settle in Huntly and became the first provost of that town. And, you know, a provost in Scotland is like the equivalent of a mayor. So she did end up with some kind of social standing, quite ironically and unintentionally, it seems like. But I think that's a great song. It really highlights the kind of snobbery that there would have been, and maybe still is. And it just shows that old Bogie was willing to lose a grandchild and a daughter over the heads of perhaps religion, but probably social standing as well. So that's my opening song for tonight. I'd like to move on now with a story. And thinking about May is really the month of the fairies being out and about after their long winter sleep. And on the 1st of May, well, some folks say that's the day you've really got to watch out, because that's when they're flitting from their winter house to their summer dwelling. And on the 1st of May, well, they're just so excited to be out and about that they like to get up to a wee bit of mischief. Now, some of them might just be naughty. They might hide your car keys. Some of them might be a bit more mischievous, and they might, well, hide poor Granny's glasses so that she can't see to read her paper. But some of them, well, they're downright nasty. And there's nothing more that they like than to go after a human baby, to take it up to the fairy hill and to leave in its place a bad fairy. And that is called a tainawa, because the baby's taken away. So this is a story, again, there's many versions of this story, but this is a version that I got from Duncan Williamson, and also used this a lot in schools when I used to work in schools a lot. And it was a story that the kids loved to learn themselves. So, up in the northwest Highlands of Scotland, there lived a young man called Malcolm. And he lived on the croft where his mother and father had lived before him. Well, Malcolm fell in love with Margaret, the school teacher in the village. And it wasn't long before they were courting, and then they got married. Well, Margaret came up and bed on the croft with Malcolm. And within the year, Margaret had some news for Malcolm. She was to be having a wee bairn. Malcolm was like a dog with twa tails. He was absolutely over the moon. Well, when the baby came, lo and behold, it was a wee laddie. And so they called him Malcolm, baby Malcolm, after his daddy. Well, this wee baby, oh, he had curly blonde hair and bright blue eyes. Oh, he was bonny, and he was absolutely no bother at all. He was the easiest baby to look after. So they were very happy. Well, Malcolm was doing work around the farm, and of course in the summer, when you're on a croft or a farm, you've got to be thinking ahead and getting ready for the winter. So Malcolm had some fields and he wanted to get the grass cut and get it made into hay, so they had that for the beasts in the winter. Well, one day, it was the 1st of May, Malcolm came in for his dinner at lunchtime, and he says to Margaret, "Oh, Margaret," he says, "I'm not getting on as well as I'd hoped, and I think there's to be rain in the next couple of days. I would really love to get that top field completely cut this afternoon." She says, "Well, that's no bother. I'll come up and help you." He says, "Well, but what about Malcolm?" "Dinna worry about him," she says. "He's that easy. We'll just bring up the wooden cradle, we'll pop him in it, and he'll sleep while I'm cutting the grass for you." So that's what they did. They took the wooden cradle up, and here, right in the middle of the field, there was a wee hillock. "Perfect," they says. "We'll put the cradle on there and we can keep an eye on him. No bother." So Margaret got ahead of the scythe, and I didn't know if any of you have tried scything grass. I have. And the man says I was a natural, but it's blooming hard work. Margaret and Malcolm got stuck in about cutting this grass. Well, there wasn't an hour gone by when suddenly Malcolm started crying, wee baby Malcolm, grizzling and greeting in his wee cradle. "Well," says Margaret, "that is awfu' unusual." But she went across and she picked him up, and still he cried on. She checked him all over, thought he'd maybe been stung by a bee or something, but no, nothing. She tried feeding him, but no, he kept on crying. She tried winding him, but no, he kept on crying. She diddled him on her knee and sang him a wee song, but no, he kept on crying. Nothing she tried could comfort him. "Oh," she says, "this is hopeless. I'm just going to have to take him back down to the house and see if I can get him settled there." Well, in the house he was no better. And in the evening he was no better until the sun sank behind the hills. And then, as quickly as he'd started, he stopped. Margaret took him through to the bedroom and she laid him in the cot. "Oh, phew," she says, "at last I'll get a bit of peace." They had peace all night long until the sun rose the next morning above the hills. And as soon as the sun appeared, Malcolm started crying and whining and gurning again. All day long he went on. Margaret tried every trick she could think of, everything her granny had told her to do with a baby, she tried, and it did not work. So by mid-afternoon, Malcolm says, "Come on, I'm going to get the horse and the cart. We're going into the town to see the doctor." That's what they did. The doctor took the baby's clothes off, listened to his heart, felt his tummy, checked him from head to toe, and then announced, "There's nothing wrong with him. Seems absolutely fine." But still he cried. On and on that evening, he kept on crying until the sun dropped behind the hill. He was quiet all night long. But as soon as the sun rose again the next morning, he was crying. Margaret was beside herself. She didn't know what to do for the best. Well, mid-morning there came a knock at the door. Margaret went, and there was the postie. Now, when you live in a rural area, the postie is maybe one of the people you know best because you see them nearly ilka day. Well, she says, "Oh, postie, come on in." He says, "Margaret, you're looking awful tired." She says, "Oh, I'm beside myself with this bairn. I didn't know what to do. There's something got into him, postie, and he's greeting and greeting and greeting." Well, says the postie, now I've had my bairns mysel and my grandfather, let me hae a look at him. So he looked at him and he thought, he'd a gey queer look about him. He'd a twinkly eye and he'd a sort of leathery look to his skin as if he'd been out in the sun too much. And he says, I tell you what, Margaret, there's a market down in the village the day. Why don't you and Big Malcolm head yourselves away down there and get a wee break? And I will stay here and look after the baby. Oh, no, 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 says Margaret. I couldn't let you do that because he'll drive you daft with all that crying. Ah, I'll be fine, says the postie. And with a bit more gentle persuasion, Margaret and Big Malcolm were out the door. Clip, clop, clip, clop. The horse's hooves disappeared into the distance. And as soon as they did, the baby stopped crying. To the postie's amazement, the baby then sat up in its cradle and says, aye, aye, postie. What, says the postie? You're speaking to me? Aye, says the baby, I am. And now that we're left on our own, postie, you and I are going to have a recht good Kaylee. He jumped out of the cot. He ran across the floor with his wee bandy legs and his droopy nappy in the middle. He ran across to the sideboard and he tugged on the door. Ah, he says, it's locked, but they canna stop me. He licked his finger, shoved his finger in the lock, opened the door and got out the whiskey and 2 glasses. He glug, 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 poured 2 generous drams and he says, here you are, postie, slange. They knocked glasses and the wee baby glugged back this whiskey. The postie's eyes were out in stalks. He couldn't believe it. Next thing was the baby's trotting back across the flare, away out the door, and he comes back in with a big straw, a big piece of straw. He stuck the poker into the fire till it was red hot, and then he burned himself some holes in the straw to make himself a wee whistle. Now, I believe we might be getting some whistle music later on tonight, but I'll wager you it wouldn't be as good as the music that baby played that afternoon for the postie, because it was music for another world. He tootled on his wee pipe and he made such music. He was filled with joy and he danced all around the room to his own music, whilst the postie was still slumped in his chair in shock. Well, it all stopped as soon as the horse's hooves from Malcolm's cart could be heard again. Before the door was opened, the wee baby had thrown the stock into the fire and jumped back into his cradle. Then as the door opened with Margaret and Malcolm, all they heard was wah, wah, wah. Oh, says Margaret, postie, have you had that din the whole time we've been out? Ha, he says, I can't begin to tell you what's been going on while you've been out. He says, I need to speak to you in private. So they went outside. The postie says, Margaret, did you buy a new blanket the day at the market? Aye, she says, I did. Well, she says, that's good, because you're going to have to go in there and pick up that bundle with your new blanket. Now that's no baby Malcolm in there. That's a bad fairy, a Tainawa. And you've got to do exactly as I say, Margaret. Well, you take your blanket, you pick up that wee bundle through there, that bad fairy, you wrap it up as tight as you can in the blanket, make sure its arms are firmly in. Then you have to walk up to the head of the waterfall. And when you get to the very top, then you have to throw that bundle down into the rushing water. And when you come back, Margaret, I guarantee you, your baby Malcolm will be back in the cradle. What, says Margaret? I've never heard anything like this. You've got to trust me, Margaret, says the postie. Well, Margaret realised she had no choice. So in she went and she picked up the crying fairy. She wrapped it tightly in the blanket And then she walked away up the glen with this bundle in her arms. And when she got to the top, she stood looking at it, and she did think it, maybe this isn't my baby Malcolm. And she sang to herself, Gorum, gorum, goria go, goria go, goria go, gorum, gorum, goria go. I couldn't find my baby. Oh. Then with her heart pounding, she stepped forward and she threw the bundle down into the rushing water and the sharp rocks below. She peered over the edge and watched as the bundle hit the water. The bundle unravelled, and out of the bundle came a wee fist shaking in the air, and a voice shouted up, that postie, if I'd kent he'd tell on me, I'd have never shared my whiskey or my best music. And with that whoosh, the bad fairy was swept away. Well, Margaret could hardly carry herself quick enough to get back to the wee house and see what was lying in the cradle. She rushed in the front door and she realised there was no crying in the room. She went across to the crib and looking inside, there was her sweet baby Malcolm with his twinkly blue eyes and his curly blonde hair, and no crying. So, I mean, that's an old belief, but I remember some years ago going to the folk museum on the Isle of Islay, and they did have a wooden crib there, and it still had a knife at the bottom of the cradle where they said, people used to keep a metal knife in the crib to scare away the fairies.
Oh, brilliant, brilliant. Oh, I really enjoyed those stories. I actually have a pain in my face from smiling, Ruth. You have a great effect on me, and I'm sure the others are the same. So we're going to give you a little break now.
Thanks, Maria. Thanks,
No
everyone.
problem at all, and I'm going to release you from the spotlight. And